The first time I realized my dad had been lying to me for half my life, I was holding this half-melted Polaroid that definitely shouldn't have survived. He always blamed the fire on a busted space heater. He claimed a box in the hall closet just went up in flames during the divorce. Old papers, family albums, all gone in minutes. I heard that story so much it just became family fact. I was clearing out his garage a few weeks after the funeral. Sweaty, totally numb, trying not to cry over tangled extension cords. Then my glove snagged on something hidden in his old tool chest. It was tucked behind a false bottom, right under some rusted screws. One corner was completely blackened and the border was bubbled from the heat, but the center was clear enough to stop me dead in my tracks. It was a picture of my dad, looking at least 30 years younger. He was standing next to a hospital bed, looking down. He had this soft, unarmored smile I had literally never seen before. There was a woman in the bed I didn't recognize at all. She was holding a newborn wrapped up in striped hospital flannel. And my dad was wearing his old steel watch from before his big promotion. The woman had a hospital band on her wrist. But what really got me was the faded orange timestamp in the corner. It said June 14th, 1992. I wasn't born until November of '94. At first, I tried to brush it off, I figured it could be a cousin or maybe a coworker's wife. But the heat had spared just enough of the hospital wristband to read 4 letters. It spelled out the name Lena. My mom's name is definitely not Lena. I stared at that picture until my knees literally ached. I kept telling myself not to make it a big dramatic thing. But then I flipped it over and saw his handwriting on the back. It said, "For M, keep safe." I wish I could say I handled this calmly, but I didn't. I called my mom that night and just blurted out, "Who's Lena?" There was this dead silence on the line. Then she asked, really carefully, "Where did you hear that name?" I told her about the Polaroid, expecting her to be mad about him cheating. But what I got was way worse. I got fear. She told me to come over right then. I drove across town in the pouring rain, staring at that photo on the passenger seat like it was a murder weapon. My mom was waiting in her kitchen when I got there. She had her arms crossed so tight it looked like it actually hurt. She's always been the practical one, super controlled. But that night, she looked 20 years older. She didn't even ask to hold the picture at first. She just stared at it from a distance, like it was gonna bite her. I set it down on the counter between us. Then she whispers, "I thought he destroyed all of them." I had to sit down because my legs felt like jelly. I asked her, "All of what?" She took this huge, shaky breath. She said, "Before me, your father was engaged." That wasn't the crazy part. People have pasts. It was the way she said it. "She got pregnant," my mom went on, not even looking at me. "There were complications after the birth. I don't know everything. He never told the whole truth." She swallowed hard. But the baby survived. The mother did too. I asked who told her, since my dad obviously kept his mouth shut. "Your Aunt Celia," she said, years later, totally by accident. My dad's older sister hadn't spoken to him in like 15 years. We always thought they fought over a house. She said when she found out I was just a baby, she found some letter about child support and confronted him. He swore the kid wasn't his, then changed his story every time she pushed. He just got meaner. I could hear my own heartbeat. I asked if he really had another kid. She just whispered, "I think so." I asked why she never told me. Her answer was brutal. Because I was ashamed that I stayed. I barely slept that night. My whole life felt like a lie. First thing the next morning, I called Aunt Celia. She answered, thinking I wanted to give her my dad's old tools. I just said, It's about Lena." The line went dead quiet. I pulled up to Aunt Celia's house right at 2 o'clock. Walking in, the place smelled exactly like I remembered. Kind of like lavender and old paper. She lived alone with this blind cat and these massive filing cabinets that basically held all our family's ghosts. When I was a kid, I just thought she was super strict. But sitting across from her now, I realized she was just someone who remembered everything. She was the family record keeper, and that terrified people who needed to forget. She didn't waste any time on small talk. She just reached over and pulled out this old biscuit tin with a cracked blue lid. She set it right on the table between us, staring right through me. Inside were all these old copies of letters and court notices, but sitting right on top of all that heavy legal paperwork was this tiny, hand-knitted pink baby sock. I just stared at it, totally frozen. It was so incredibly small and fragile. It looked completely wrong sitting on top of those cold, typed legal threats. I remember thinking, human heartbreak really shouldn't fit in the palm of your hand. Aunt Celia watched me for a second before she finally spoke. Her name was Nora, she told me. I looked up, barely able to breathe, and asked if she meant the baby. She just nodded and said, "Your father's daughter." Hearing it out loud actually made me feel sick. I went from burning hot to freezing cold in a second. I wanted to argue, to defend my dad, but I couldn't. The proof was right there in front of me. His name, her name, and a petition for child support. I saw the paternity notice, and then a settlement that was completely sealed. When I asked why it was sealed, she said my dad paid for it. Actually, my grandfather paid for it because he cared way more about our reputation than the truth. She gave me the whole story in pieces. My dad got Lena pregnant at 24 and promised to marry her. But when the baby came early with complications, he totally panicked. He'd just started at the bank, and my grandparents pressured him to just walk away. So Lena sued for support, and Aunt Celia actually helped her find a lawyer, which started this huge family war. My dad settled quietly once the blood test proved it was his. 6 months later, he met my mom and just completely reinvented himself. I had to grip the edge of the table just to stay upright. I asked if he ever even tried to see her. Aunt Celia said maybe once or twice, but when I asked if he knew where she was, her answer hollowed me out. She just said yes. Aunt Celia didn't try to sugarcoat it. She just reached into that old tin and slid one last paper across the table. It was a copy of a Christmas card, sent straight to his office, not our house. The note inside was written in a kid's careful handwriting. She told him she lost her front tooth and it made her whistle. She just wanted to know if he still played the trumpet. No begging, no anger. Just a little girl reaching out. He never replied. I asked Aunt Celia why she kept all this stuff if she hated the drama. She looked at me like I was a naive kid. She said, someone had to remember what happened to that girl. That girl. I went home with the copies and just sat on my floor until it got dark. I kept thinking about all the normal, sweet, intermittent things my dad did for me. He wasn't some obvious monster. He was a good dad to me, and he still erased a whole child just to keep his life easy. That kind of betrayal totally messes with your head. It makes you wonder if kindness even counts when it's that selective. I needed hard proof, something real that couldn't be argued away. So I opened my laptop and started digging into that archive code. The number wasn't a room. It was a civil case code from the 90s. The file was sealed, but the docket entry was still there. I stared at the screen until my eyes hurt. It listed a paternity petition, and right there it said, "Minor child, Nora Voss Mercer."
He gave her his last name on paper and then just pretended she didn't exist. Finding her should have been impossible. But lies leave a trail, you know? They take work to keep up. The truth just sits there waiting. I tracked an old address to an obituary and kept digging.
Her last name was different now. I finally found this one social media profile that was mostly private. The only picture was just a little ceramic fox on a windowsill. The name on the account was Nora Vale. What stopped me wasn't being scared I was wrong. It was being terrified I was right. How do you even message someone and say, "Hey, I think our dad abandoned you to raise me"? I typed and deleted like 6 different drafts. Finally, I just sent the plain truth. I finally stopped typing and deleting. There's no gentle way to drop a bomb like this, so I just sent the plain truth. I told her my name and said I'd understand if she never replied. 12 hours later, my phone buzzed. Her reply was brief. She wasn't surprised and had always wondered when someone would come looking. Reading that made my chest tighten more than anger ever could. We agreed to meet a week later at a tea shop halfway between us. I got there early and grabbed a window table. My stomach was in knots. I just watched the door, terrified. I knew it was her before she even sat down. We didn't look identical, but she had this incredibly calm face and my father's left eyebrow. Seeing it on a stranger nearly knocked the air out of me. She was 40 now, wearing a navy cardigan that made her look so grounded. As she sat down, I noticed a tiny burn scar near her thumb. That one small detail made her real in a way paperwork never could. We talked really carefully at first. She told me she'd always known our father's name. Then she said Aunt Celia had been secretly sending her birthday cards for years. Cards filled with little updates about my life. Hearing that she knew about my piano lessons almost broke me. I covered my mouth, drowning in guilt. I hadn't done anything wrong, but I felt implicated just by being the kid who was loved openly. Nora just looked at me with this deep understanding. She told me I didn't owe her an apology. She said I was just born into the version of him that showed up. That grace nearly undid me. Once I finally caught my breath, I had to ask, did he ever try to contact her when she was an adult? She nodded. She said he reached out exactly once, right after her mother got sick. My head snapped up. Sick? Nora explained that her mom had battled breast cancer 12 years ago. During that time, our father sent flowers with no card, then called from a blocked number to ask if she'd told her everything. She reached into her bag and pulled out this incredibly worn envelope. She said her mom gave it to her right after her second surgery. Lena told her, "If he ever denies you again, you need to know who taught him how." Inside was a copy of a letter from my grandfather's attorney to Lena's lawyer. It was from back during the original settlement. Most of it was just dense legal jargon. But then there was this one paragraph. It was as cold as steel. I had to read it twice before I actually understood what it meant. They claimed her prenatal care was funded through charitable channels using disputed identity info. They were threatening to expose her to public scrutiny. They knew exactly how to terrify her. Nora told me her mom had used a fake address at a free clinic. She was completely uninsured and hiding from her landlord at the time. His family's lawyers twisted that to make it sound like deliberate fraud. They weaponized her poverty because they knew she was terrified of losing her baby. That was the lawsuit he buried. It wasn't just about child support, it was straight-up coercion. A young mother pressured into silence by a family with better lawyers. Suddenly, I understood why Aunt Celia kept that tiny pink sock. It wasn't sentiment, it was an indictment. I asked Nora why she never came looking for him once she grew up. Her answer was so simple it kind of broke my heart. She said she watched what waiting for him did to her mother, and she decided she was never going to build her life around a closed door. That sentence stayed with me for weeks. We kept meeting up, not in some fake rush to become sisters overnight, but just to learn each other. I found out she hates cantaloupe and wet wool, and she learned I always read the last page of a mystery novel first when I'm anxious. During one of our talks, she laughed with her whole body. Her guard just completely dropped for a second. And when she did, she looked more like me than our father. It felt like this tiny, beautiful victory. Then came the part that changed absolutely everything. I was back in my dad's storage unit, just trying to get through the rest of his stuff. I opened up this heavy cardboard box labeled tax receipts. I figured it was just decades of boring financial records. But instead of tax forms, my hands hit cold metal. I pulled out this dark gray, scratched up cash box hidden at the bottom. There wasn't a key anywhere, but the lock was flimsy, almost like it was waiting for me to pry it open. I didn't even need a key for that cash box. The lock was so flimsy, I just popped it open with a screwdriver. I sat there on the cold concrete, pulling back the lid to see what else he'd been hiding. Inside, right next to some old passports, was a thick stack of white envelopes. They were tied up with these old rubber bands that practically crumbled when I touched them. And on the front of every single one, he'd written a year: 2008, 2009, 2010. I pulled off the rubber bands and opened the first one. My hands were actually shaking a little bit. It wasn't tax stuff or bank statements. It was a stack of printed online search pages, tracking Nora's addresses over the years. The printouts were covered in my dad's handwriting. He'd made all these little notes in the margins, things like married 2013, one son. He was even trying to figure out if Aunt Celia was still in contact with her. My skin just started to crawl. He wasn't keeping tabs on her because he missed her or because he wanted to reach out. He was tracking her. He was monitoring her life from a distance, like she was some kind of threat. At the bottom of the very last page, I found one more note. It made me physically recoil. It said, "No claim if settlement holds. Confirm with R." R was Roland Haynes, my dad's longtime attorney. I called Roland the very next morning, demanding copies of all the estate documents. He got oddly formal right away. He warned me not to look into prior sealed matters. It was the lawyer version of shut up. I cut him off and asked, "Did my dad alter his estate because of Nora?" Roland paused for a really long time. That silence was all the answer I needed. He had actively planned around her to make sure she got absolutely nothing. For 3 days, I was so angry I could barely see straight. But then, that anger finally did something useful. I met up with Nora and asked if she wanted to challenge the estate. She surprised me. She said she didn't want his money badly enough to spend years in court. She was right, but it felt so wrong that he got to escape the consequences. So I looked at her and asked, "What do you want?" She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "I want the truth to stop being arranged for his comfort." I set up a meeting at Aunt Celia's house. I brought my mom, Nora, and my dad's lawyer, Roland. I told him there were issues with the estate paperwork. Guys like him always think they can control a room just by showing up in a dark suit. But he definitely didn't control that room. We all brought something to the table. My mom brought the burned Polaroid. Aunt Celia had the old letters, and I had the surveillance printouts. Nora brought the threat letter they sent her mom. Roland tried his usual legal spin first. He kept throwing around words like regrettable and complex context. He wanted to brush it off as a private family matter, but Aunt Celia cut right through him. She looked him dead in the eye and said, "He helped a frightened boy become a cowardly man." I actually saw the guy flush. He lost his footing for a second, and then he made a huge mistake. He turned to me and tried to play the guilt card. He said my dad was just trying to protect what he built for me, like I was supposed to be grateful for that.
I wasn't about to thank him for funding my life by erasing my sister. I looked right at him and said, "Then he built it on fraud." The whole room just went dead quiet. I didn't mean legal fraud exactly. It was moral fraud. Roland tried to argue that the settlement was totally lawful. Maybe it was, but coercion can look pretty legal on paper. I told him I didn't want a courtroom drama or a media circus. My demands were actually really simple. I just wanted the truth on the record. I demanded a full written accounting of everything. Every payment, every estate revision, and every contact related to Nora. I wanted the original sealed case files preserved, not shredded. I needed him to confirm my dad acknowledged paternity, and he needed to stop talking like Nora was just some rumor. He tried to refuse at first. Then Aunt Celia casually brought up reporting him to the state bar. And then my mom spoke up. After years of apologizing for my dad, she finally found her voice. She looked at Roland with this incredible steadiness. She told him if any records disappeared now, it would become everyone's problem. Roland looked around the table and realized he was trapped. There wasn't a single weak link left in that room. He knew he had lost. Less than 2 weeks later, we got all the documents. Honestly, I wish I hadn't read some of them. There were notes from strategy calls about minimizing his exposure. They even routed mail to his office to avoid upsetting his home life. I found a memo advising him to update his will specifically to block Nora. He was actively protecting himself from her existence. That was the final break in me. It wasn't just the abandoned child or the legal threats. It was the maintenance. The years of deliberate effort it took to keep one daughter visible and one daughter buried. So, I sold the house. People in my extended family thought I was impulsive, ungrateful, emotional. Maybe I was. I sold it anyway. It was just too full of curated memory. Too many polished surfaces hiding rot underneath. I took a portion of the money and offered half to Nora. She refused the first time, then the second. She didn't want anything to do with his wealth. On the third attempt, she said,
I won't take charity. I told her, it isn't charity, it's correction. She looked at me for a long time and said, you know this won't fix him. I said, I know. It fixes me. We worked it out through attorneys, so it was clean and final. She used some of it to pay off her shop loan and set up a college fund for her son. The rest she put in a trust under Lena's maiden name. When she told me that, I cried in my car for 10 minutes. I didn't need to punish a dead man. I just needed to stop carrying benefits that had been shaped by his lie as if they were neutral. My mother started therapy at 63. She finally stopped apologizing for surviving her marriage. The defensive posture she had held for decades began to soften. She started living for herself. Aunt Celia began coming to Sunday lunch once a month. We talk about ordinary things now. Tomatoes, weather, the cat. Sometimes ordinary life is the most radical ending after generations of secrecy.
As for me, I kept one thing from my father's garage, the Polaroid. Not because I forgive him, not because I want to preserve his image. I keep it because it's the moment the official story failed. A burned photograph he thought was gone became the one thing he couldn't control. It gave a date, a face, a wristband. It led me to a sister who had every reason to hate me, and instead offered me honesty. I used to think justice had to be loud, like courtrooms, dramatic confessions, public disgrace. I thought someone had to be punished in front of an audience for it to actually count. But sometimes justice is way quieter than that. It's just refusing the inheritance of denial. It's looking at the foundation of your life and deciding not to build on top of a lie. It's saying the hidden name out loud at the dinner table without flinching. It's letting the people who were erased back into the family history where they belong. Choosing honesty over comfort. Justice is splitting what was hoarded for decades. It's taking the resources meant to protect a secret and using them to heal the damage instead. Making sure it doesn't carry the stain of the lie. It's keeping records, just like Aunt Celia did. Making sure that when the next generation asks what happened, the truth is waiting for them in plain sight. Refusing to let history be rewritten. Most importantly, it's telling the story correctly at last. No more convenient omissions. No more protecting the pride of a man who couldn't face his own choices. My dad always said the burned photo album was a tragic accident after the divorce. He played the victim so well, blaming a faulty space heater for erasing our past. I believed that story for 28 years. Now I know it wasn't an accident at all. It was a rehearsal. He'd been trying to set fire to the evidence long before the marriage ever ended. He thought he'd destroyed every trace of her, thought he'd successfully curated his legacy. He just never imagined one small square of truth would survive him. That burned photograph broke the silence. It gave me a sister. It freed my mother, and it finally let me breathe. The truth doesn't always look pretty, but it's the only thing that lasts.